すいません。
はい。
抹茶の入ったカクテルとかできますか？
もちろんです。かしこまりました。
Today's video was brought to you by my debut feature film, Matcha and Vanilla, out now on Gaga Ooh La La.
Hang on. I have to consent.
It's okay.
There we go. Recording in progress.
Okay. So I invited my friend of 32 years. So this is where I never do it right the first time. Okay. To talk a bit more in depth about bipolar disorder, I've invited my friend of 32 years, a mental health advocate and someone with a background in counselling. And are you prepared to talk, I don't know, with lived experience?
How about we say someone who lives with mental health rather than suffers from mental health? Because at the moment I'm not suffering, but it's a life sentence, not a death sentence.
There you go. So maybe I should leave that in because I think that's good. I think it's kind of nice to have an error and then anyway. So did I say suffer? I don't remember. Anyway, so okay. So to talk about this in more depth, I've invited my best friend of 32 years on, who has lived experience, is a mental health advocate, and who has a background in counselling. So who else could I talk to? So welcome, Ellen Manning. So what to ask first? So with James Dean, of course, nobody knows really. People have just said, based on what people have said about him.
What we know is what we know about everyone.
Yeah.
What we know is what happened to him. And what we know is that he had a traumatic childhood.
Yeah.
What we know is that he had a terrible life experience. And what we know is the time that he spent learning, growing, and developing, he wasn't given all of the tools that he needed.
No.
And then he was thrown into an unreal world and expected to have 20 years of experience and 20 years of learning that he was never given. And when you think that the human brain doesn't stop developing until 21, and they reckon that humans don't reach maturity until their late 20s, early 30s, it's a lot of presumed knowledge and expectations that he was handed a role to play without being given the script. And in his movies, he was given the script. In real life, you're not given the script, and he did the best with what he was given.
This is right.
But when you're not given your full amount of change, then you're running short.
But I mean, you know, what an achievement, really. You know, like few people achieve what he's achieved in just 3 major motion pictures, only one of which was released before his passing. So you know, because my videos are like what ifs. So like, what if he did have bipolar? I feel like not many people really understand beyond Jekyll and Hyde what that actually means.
I think more and more diagnoses have become descriptive rather than prescriptive. And even though we've come a long, long way from, oh my God, they're nuts, lock them up, which is is what mental health always was. If you
Yeah.
were a rich family, then the crazy auntie or the crazy brother was kept in the attic.
Yeah.
If you were a poor family, they were put in an institution and left there.
That's right.
And we've come a long way from there, but we still don't know what to do with people who don't fit the norm,
Right.
or people who are troubled, or people who require extra care. And it doesn't matter whether that's a chronic condition like asthma, diabetes, Crohn's disease, obesity, or mental health. We know to like a certain percentage of how to help them and to stop them from dying.
Right.
But we don't really know how to help people to live. And if he did have bipolar disorder, maybe he would have been medicated. Maybe he would have been one of the people that medication made them feel like an empty tomb. And he wouldn't have taken his medication anyway, because all of their creativity, all of their identity, all of their enjoyment is taken out. And it takes away the risk factor, and it takes away the things that make other people uncomfortable and that bring them suffering. But it also takes away the things they enjoy. Like Newcastle recently had the Van Gogh exhibit.
Yes.
And Van Gogh did die because of mental health. He was in an institution. He shot himself. So that's a 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
But James Dean was a 20-something-year-old boy who jumped in a fast car.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of I've lost 2 cousins in their 20s in the last 10 years now that didn't have mental health disorders. Both of them jumped in a fast car. One of them killed just himself. One of them killed his girlfriend and best friend. And what would have happened if one of them hadn't had a fight with his partner before he got in the car? Would he have still driven like an idiot and killed himself?
Yeah.
What would have happened if the other one had made a different choice that night, or the friend had driven? And it's just one of those, I think as people, we look for answers and we look for reasons and we look for a way to understand it. And sometimes there just isn't a way to understand it. And if he didn't have bipolar, then the next thing that gets assumed is borderline personality.
Right.
So what if he didn't have borderline personality? What if he wasn't able to make connections? What if he was always afraid of being abandoned? What if he was always afraid of failing? And when I had the issues at work early on, that was one of the things that the work psychiatrist said, oh, she's got borderline, there'll be nothing you can do with her. And that in itself, and when you look at the percentage of people at the moment that are diagnosed with borderline, and when you go through the DSM, which is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, it gives you a list of criteria and says if you meet a certain number of criteria, wham, that's what you've got, that's what we treat. At the moment, I'm on medications that are for schizophrenia and for medications that are for anxiety, even though I have a diagnosis of bipolar. But I also have a diagnosis of being medication resistant. And if you remember the period of time that I was in and out of hospital, I was written off then as being medication resistant simply because the medications they gave everyone else in the hospital at that point in time didn't work for me.
And I did look up whether lithium would have been available, and it did seem like in the 50s it was there, but then I guess the fear is you're going to be put into a sanitarium and lock the key and throw it like Francis Farmer was.
Yeah, but there's always a fear of anyone who's different.
Yeah,
And up until the 80s or 90s, homosexuality was a mental health disorder.
that's true.
If you have a look, there's a lot of things on the internet where people are laughing at reasons that women were institutionalized.
Novel
And
reading.
but well, novel reading. On the same list
Mm.
is wanting too much sex, not wanting sex enough.
Right.
On the same list is being too emotional, not being emotional enough.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time it was just if the family and the spouse and the children couldn't cope with difficulties that someone was having, stick them in an institution. If you're
Right.
rich enough, you stick them in the attic. If you're not rich enough, you stick them in an institution.
Right. Oh dear. Yeah. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Because I remember having this sort of conversation with my grandma,
Yeah.
and like grandma always said that mum and dad were the walking wounded. And then you and I both know that we went through a fair bit of religious abuse.
Sure.
And my grandma always said, oh, people went through a lot back in my day, but no one had a mental health disorder. I'm like, don't be funny. You always had Bob the neighbour from number 13
Yeah.
who was the alcoholic. You always had Mavis who met Gordon at the bus stop to get his paycheck because he went to the pub after work. And if she didn't get the paycheck from him before he went to the pub, she wouldn't have money to feed the kids.
That's right.
You always had Daphne, who was a little strange, you know.
Yeah.
And the same with kids, you know, we never had autism, we never had ADHD. Well, I've got an uncle who is ADHD, like in capital letters with exclamation marks. And she fought to get him to school. He had what's called now a school resistance. He had a much higher IQ than anyone ever accepted, but he was not accelerated in classes because that never happened then. He had he had fixations, he had the lack of sleep, he had the oversleeping, he had not liking to wear clothes, he had all of the things that now parents would go, oh my God, I have to help this child. Whereas back then it was adult discipline deficit disorder.
Right.
Where
Spare the rod
you
and spoil the child.
where you just beat it out of them.
Right.
But now he's a highly successful lawyer because he was able to work full time, raise a family, study full time, get all of his qualifications, and he can still work now from sunrise to sunset and not lose motivation, not lose energy. And when he gets fixated on a case, he can like do really well at it. And it's just one of those, like, you want to think that if anyone famous or valuable or special had lived in these days, that we would have fixed them or helped them or prevented them. But the fact is, you've got your Kanye's, you've got your Britneys, you've got your everyone, and all the money in the world and all the help in the world, and even with things like hoarding disorder. There's the book that's recently come out, I'm Glad My Mum Died.
Oh, it's a great book.
Yeah, but parents were hoarders. And I can tell you now, no one knows what to do with hoarders, and pretty much no one wants to.
Right.
The
Except for that,
council,
the trauma cleaner kind of helps people, but I mean, I live in the apartment block, and sometimes you see through the window, and you're like, oh, that person has like an inch of space to live with. But
well, working in aged care, you hear different things and different things people say about, oh, the cleaner came in and moved such and such or threw such and such out. And sometimes it's like, okay, that was important. The cleaner didn't realise. But sometimes it's like those 21 yogurt containers
yes,
meant a lot to that person.
right.
It meant something very different to what anyone else would think they mean.
Exactly.
And again, like the hoarders I know have a massive amount of trauma in their lives.
That's right.
Financial, they've been through wars, they've been through poverty, they've been through abuse, they've been through being rich, they've been anything out of the normal, but then you've got people who come from exactly the same circumstances who aren't hoarders. And how do you know?
That's right. Like, it, you know, like, I guess that's sort of if we knew the reason, you'd be able to help everyone. Like, what's the...
Well, even if you knew the reason, you couldn't help, because
Right.
every person comes with a blueprint
Mm,
and everyone's blueprint's different.
that's true.
And that's one of the reasons that I personally believe that religion doesn't work, because religion is erase everyone, form them into the one thing, and then get them to function as an individual.
Sure.
And it just doesn't work like that. But even when you think of women in 2020, 2023, who are in limiting, restrictive cultures,
Sure.
where they could move to somewhere else but don't want to, or if they move to a country that doesn't have that limited, restrictive culture, they maintain those cultural traditions and maintain that. Or you have men who don't have to sacrifice everything to be successful in their career and to be high income earners, and who have heart attacks at 30 because of the stress. But they choose that because that's an identity that they pursue. And if you come back to James Dean, was he trying to be a man, and was it because there was no one confirmed or denied that he was gay, but there's rumours and suspicions and everything that he was? And was
Likely
he trying to prove?
bisexual. Like, he when he passed away, he was living with his intimate partner, let's say, for YouTube's sake.
But was he trying to prove he was a man by doing all of these things? Because at the time, homosexuality was still not just socially acceptable, but a mental disorder.
That's right. Yeah, you have a great point. I mean, that's, is the car racing, because I thought the car racing might have been like a sort of part of a manic episode of like trying to, get that rush and that high. But then you're right, it could be proving he was a man.
But it could have been 20 things.
It could have been.
And it could have been 5 things at the same time.
As most things are, aren't they? Because when people say, like, why do you live in Japan? Like, there is no one answer. There's a bunch of answers, and they all were factors. Because so this is the book that I highly recommend everybody reads. which was written by his partner at the end. So yeah, he does.
Well, there's evidence that he was a ladies' man, but there's also a great deal of evidence that all of those relationships were platonic.
Well, it does seem that the one with Elizabeth Taylor was platonic. I mean, yeah, but I mean, who knows?
But unfortunately, the man hasn't been around to ask any of the questions.
No. I mean, all we've got is, I mean, Bill, who's passed away himself. But yeah, I mean, it could very well be. I mean, because like he's a bit of a contradiction in a way. Because like I was trying to think of like that what is it, the oceans thing, the 5-factor model of, you know, assessing someone. And I was thinking like that first factor of openness to experience. He was extremely open to experience, but he was also afraid to fly. So like how open is he to experience?
But you can have a look at like our experience, and I'm terrified of heights.
Yeah.
But we've been hot air ballooning, we've been bridge climbing,
That's right.
we've been all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of evidence to say I'm not afraid of heights, but I can tell you now, I'm scared of heights. I have a real fear of heights.
Yeah.
But if you read a memoir or you look at facts outside of context, there's a lot of evidence to say, well, she did all those things, she can't be afraid of heights.
That's exactly right.
And you get the same thing when you have all of these memoirs. And when you look at it, like my grandma's always said, there's his side of the story, her side of the story, and then there's the truth.
Sure.
So even if he had have written an autobiography, it would have only been through his eyes. And anyone who asks him a question, it just gives him it could possibly be, because none of us know.
No, well, that's right. So yeah, but that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, was he trying to prove that he was, you know, the big man in town on his motorbike? Because like he really looked up to Marlon Brando and he copied him to a large degree. Like anything Brando did, he basically did.
Remember, I went through that phase where I was like really fixated on becoming like Mother Teresa and was so inspired by Mother Teresa. You know.
Yeah, we didn't. This is before we knew Mother Teresa. But yeah, it's, well, that's right. I mean, I mean, he's a young man. Like he was what, 26, I want to say, when he passed, 25, 26. Like he was very, very young. Like he just, yeah.
When you think about it, most kids wouldn't have graduated uni by that time.
No, that's right. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, he did achieve his goal, his early ambition to have his work remembered in history, to leave something in the world that will last for generations. That's greatness. It's one of his quotes. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not saying he had an unsuccessful life, you know.
But isn't there that Macklemore quote that you die twice, first when they actually put you in the ground and the second time when the last person remembers you?
Sure. Yeah. That's probably, I suppose, someone who's obsessed with immortality would say that there is like that second death.
But if you think about it, when you die,
Mm.
do you want 30 friends to show up and remember who you were? Or do you want 100 celebrities to show up who only ever saw you on your Sunday best?
Right. This is right. I'll take the first one. I'll take like 5 people. Honestly, like I only need 5 people to show up to my funeral.
If you let them have a funeral for me, I swear to God, I will haunt you. I'm going to remind you this all the time. I don't care if you weekend at Bernie's me, but if you let me have a funeral, I will work out a way to haunt you. And it won't be anything like rattling chains in the attic or anything. It'll be stealing every left shoe and making sure that the seam in your sock is uncomfortable every day.
It already is. I've put on that much weight. Yes. Oh dear. Well, so on that note, let's wrap it up. But thank you so much for chatting, and I hope maybe when I do something on Montgomery Cliff, like if you're willing, I might ask you to come again, and please leave a nice comment in the comments below, and if you leave a nasty one, I will delete it. So thanks a lot. Bye. So this is the part that people don't see, because you're like, oh, how do I stop the recording?
すいません。
はい。
抹茶の入ったカクテルとかできますか？
もちろんです。かしこまりました。
Today's video was brought to you by my debut feature film, Matcha and Vanilla, out now on Gaga Ooh La La.